A mansion can be filled with light and still be the loneliest place in the world. The first time I saw Moretti Estate, it looked like something torn from the pages of a luxury magazine. Golden lights glowed from hundreds of tall windows. Stone columns stretched toward the night sky. Perfect hedges lined a circular driveway so large it could have held my entire apartment building. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel of my aging Honda Civic and checked the address again. It was right. Somehow, impossibly, this was where I had been hired. My name is Olivia Carter, and at 27 years old, I thought I understood loneliness. I spent my days teaching art classes at a small community center outside Manhattan. Most of my students were children who carried burdens too heavy for their age. Some came from broken homes. Some struggled to fit in. Some simply needed a place where they felt seen. I understood that feeling better than most. But that night, as I parked beneath the glow of the mansion's exterior lights, I had no idea I was about to meet a child who would redefine everything I thought I knew about being alone. A uniformed gate attendant checked my identification before allowing me through. The gates opened silently. Everything about the estate seemed designed to impress without effort. Wealth lingered in every detail. The fountain at the center of the driveway. The imported stone. The rows of carefully trimmed trees illuminated by hidden lights. Yet despite all of it, something felt strangely cold. The front door opened before I could knock. An older woman with silver hair greeted me with a polite smile. "Miss Carter," she said warmly. "We've been expecting you." Her name was Margaret Hayes, the estate's longtime house manager. She led me through hallways lined with artwork worth more than I would earn in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Marble floors reflected soft golden light. Everything was beautiful. Everything was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that felt practiced. As though everyone inside had learned not to disturb it. "Mr. Moretti is occupied this evening," Margaret explained. "But Noah is waiting." Noah. The 8-year-old boy I had been hired to tutor privately in art. She guided me into a massive room at the center of the mansion. I stopped walking. A chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting warm light across polished floors. Beneath it sat a single child. He was small for his age. Dark hair. Pale skin. A sketchbook balanced on his knees. He didn't look up when we entered. He simply continued drawing. The image itself was simple. A large house. A bright sky. A tiny figure standing alone near the edge of the page. Something tightened in my chest. Margaret quietly excused herself, leaving us alone. I approached carefully and sat across from him. "That's a beautiful drawing," I said softly. Noah glanced up for the first time. His green eyes met mine. For a second, I forgot every prepared introduction. There was sadness there. Not dramatic sadness. Not the kind people talked about. The quieter kind. The kind that settled into someone and refused to leave. "Do you like drawing houses?" I asked. He looked at the picture again. Then he shrugged. "It's not the house," he said quietly. His voice was so soft I almost missed it. "It's the light." I followed his gaze back to the sketch. The windows glowed bright yellow against the dark background. Warm. Inviting. Alive. Yet the small figure remained outside. Standing alone. Looking in. Noah lowered his pencil. "People think lights make a place feel happy," he said. "Sometimes they don't." I stared at him, suddenly unable to find words. Because in that moment, sitting beneath the largest chandelier I had ever seen, surrounded by more luxury than most people could imagine, I realized something wasn't right inside Moretti Estate. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I had the feeling that the brightest house I had ever entered was hiding a darkness no one wanted to talk about. Some people walk into a room and bring noise with them. Others walk in and take all the noise away. I learned the difference about 10 minutes after meeting Noah. We spent the next hour sketching together beneath the chandelier. Or at least, I sketched. Noah mostly watched. Every now and then he added a line to his drawing, then sat back as if he was carefully measuring whether the world deserved another piece of his attention. Children usually filled silence with questions. Noah seemed to collect silence instead. By the time I finished a simple landscape drawing, I realized he had not asked me a single thing about myself. Not where I lived. Not how old I was. Not even why I had come. It was as though he had already learned that people eventually leave, so there was no point becoming curious about them. The thought stayed with me longer than I wanted. "Do you always draw at night?" I asked gently. He nodded. "The house is quieter." I almost laughed at the irony. The mansion already felt quieter than any place I had ever visited. But before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond the room. Noah immediately straightened in his chair. His fingers tightened around his pencil. The change was subtle, but I noticed it. Children always reveal their feelings through the smallest movements. The footsteps grew closer. Slow. Measured. Confident. Not the hurried pace of staff members. Not the casual walk of a guest. This was someone who expected every hallway to belong to him. The room seemed to change before he even appeared. The air felt different. Heavier somehow. Then he stepped through the doorway. Ethan Moretti. I knew who he was before anyone introduced him. His photographs occasionally appeared in business magazines. Real estate. Investments. Philanthropy. The public version of a powerful man. The man standing in front of me looked nothing like a magazine photograph. He looked real. Taller than I expected. Broad shoulders beneath a dark tailored suit. Dark hair touched with the slightest hint of silver near his temples. His face was calm, composed, almost unreadable. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Green. The same shade as Noah's. Except where Noah's eyes carried sadness, Ethan's carried distance. The kind built over years. He paused just inside the room. Noah lowered his gaze to the sketchbook. Ethan noticed. I could tell he noticed because something flickered across his expression before disappearing just as quickly. "Miss Carter." His voice was deep and controlled. "Thank you for coming." I stood. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Moretti." He glanced at the drawings scattered across the table. "Margaret tells me Noah spoke with you." Noah shifted uncomfortably. Ethan looked surprised. Not dramatically surprised. More like someone who had stopped expecting certain things a long time ago. "A little," I answered. "He is very talented." Noah stared harder at the page. Ethan's eyes followed him for a moment. There was something strange about the exchange. Not hostility. Not anger. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge neither seemed able to cross. "I hope the evening was comfortable," Ethan said. "If there is anything you need, you only have to ask." Most wealthy people said things like that out of habit. Ethan sounded like he genuinely meant it. Yet somehow the sincerity made the distance between him and his son feel even more obvious. As he turned to leave, Noah suddenly spoke. "Dad." Ethan stopped immediately. The room went completely still. Noah looked up from his drawing. "She stayed." 3 simple words. That was all. But something changed in Ethan's expression. For the first time since entering the room, the carefully controlled mask slipped. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see that whatever was missing inside this mansion had nothing to do with money, power, or success. It had everything to do with the people living under its roof. The people who need love the most rarely know how to ask for it. That thought stayed with me during the drive home. The city lights blurred beyond my windshield as midnight settled over Manhattan, but my mind remained inside Moretti Estate. I kept seeing Noah sitting beneath that enormous chandelier. Kept hearing those 3 words. She stayed. They should not have sounded important. Yet something about the way he said them lingered with me long after I reached my apartment. The next afternoon, I returned to the estate carrying a canvas bag filled with sketchbooks, charcoal pencils, and enough art supplies to start a small classroom. Margaret greeted me with the same warm smile. The mansion looked different in daylight. Less mysterious. Less intimidating. Sunlight poured through the massive windows. The garden stretched across acres of perfectly maintained grounds. Yet despite the beauty, I noticed something unusual. There were no signs of children. No bicycles. No soccer balls. No evidence that an 8-year-old boy actually lived there. Everything felt designed for adults. Perfect. Controlled. Untouched. Noah was waiting in the art room when I arrived. This time, he looked up immediately. Not a smile. Not quite. But close enough to count as progress. We spent the first hour experimenting with watercolor paints. At first he worked cautiously, adding small strokes of color with careful precision. Then something shifted. The colors became bolder. Brighter. More confident. I watched him lose himself in the process the way children should. The way children deserve to. Do you have friends at school? I asked casually. His brush paused. Not really. Why not? He shrugged. Most people already have friends. The answer sounded older than 8 years old. I recognized it immediately. It was the kind of explanation people give after disappointment. Not before it. Before I could respond, my eyes drifted toward another sheet of paper resting beside him. A drawing I had not seen before. It showed the mansion again. But this time there was something new. A woman stood near the front entrance. Long hair. A simple dress. One hand reaching toward a child. The details were rough, but the image carried an unmistakable feeling. Hope. Who is she? I asked gently. Noah immediately flipped the page over. Too quickly. His cheeks turned slightly red. Nobody. Children are not good liars. Not because they lack skill. Because they still want someone to understand the truth. I pretended not to notice. We returned to painting. Later that evening, Margaret invited me to stay for dinner. I almost declined. Then she mentioned Noah seemed happier when I was there. So I stayed. The dining room could have seated 30 people comfortably. Only 3 chairs were occupied. Noah sat at one end. Ethan sat at the other. I found myself somewhere in between. The conversation remained polite but sparse. Noah spoke the least. Ethan watched the most. Every time Noah laughed quietly at something, Ethan's attention shifted toward him as though he was hearing music he had nearly forgotten existed. Halfway through the meal, Noah excused himself to retrieve something from upstairs. The moment he disappeared, silence settled over the table. Ethan set down his glass and looked toward the staircase. He likes you. The statement caught me off guard. I like him too. Ethan nodded slowly. For a moment he seemed about to say something else. Something important. Instead, he glanced toward the hallway where Noah had disappeared. The distance returned to his expression. Thank you for staying, he said quietly. The strange thing was that this time, when he said it, I had the feeling he was not talking about art lessons at all. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when nobody realizes they are speaking. I thought about Ethan's words during the next week. Thank you for staying. Simple. Polite. Yet they lingered in my mind longer than they should have. By my 4th visit to the estate, a routine had begun to form. Noah met me in the art room every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. We painted. We sketched. We talked a little more each time. The mansion no longer felt quite as intimidating as it had that first night. I knew where the sunlight landed in the hallways during late afternoon. I knew which staircase Noah preferred. I even knew Margaret always kept fresh cookies in the kitchen for him, though she pretended they appeared there by accident. What I did not understand was Ethan Moretti. Some days I barely saw him. Other days I would catch a glimpse of him across the estate. Walking through a hallway. Speaking quietly with staff members. Standing near one of the enormous windows overlooking the gardens. He moved through the mansion like someone carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. One rainy afternoon, Noah became unusually focused on a painting. The canvas showed a lake surrounded by trees. A small dock stretched across the water. In the distance stood two figures. One tall. One small. They faced the sunset together. "That is beautiful," I told him. Noah studied the painting carefully. "It is not finished." "What is missing?" He considered the question. "They are standing together," he said. "But they are still far apart." Before I could ask what he meant, he returned to painting. The answer stayed with me. Later that evening, Noah went upstairs to change before dinner, leaving his supplies scattered across the table. I stayed behind to organize brushes and clean palettes. That was when I felt it. The strange sensation of being watched. I looked up. Ethan stood quietly in the doorway. I had not heard him enter. The rain tapped softly against distant windows. For a moment neither of us spoke. His eyes settled on Noah's unfinished painting. "He has improved," he said. "He is talented." Ethan nodded. He was always talented. There was pride in his voice. But there was something else too. Regret perhaps. I wiped my hands with a cloth. "He talks about you sometimes." Ethan looked surprised. "Does he?" "Not directly." A faint smile touched my lips. "Children usually tell you things without realizing it." His gaze returned to the painting. The two figures standing on the dock beneath a painted sunset. "And what has he told you?" The question felt careful. Measured. As though he was afraid of the answer. I hesitated. "I think he misses you." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles when a truth lands exactly where it belongs. Ethan looked away first. Toward the rain beyond the windows. "I am here every day." Being present and being available are not always the same thing. The words escaped before I could stop them. My heart immediately sank. I had crossed a line. Ethan could have been offended. Could have reminded me who he was and why I was there. Instead, he surprised me. A quiet laugh escaped him. The first genuine laugh I had heard. Brief. Almost disbelieving. When he looked back at me, something had changed. Not much. Just enough. "You are the first person in a long time who speaks to me that honestly, Miss Carter." Then his eyes drifted once more to Noah's painting. "Maybe that is why he likes you so much. Houses do not change overnight. People do." I noticed it on a Thursday afternoon when Noah met me at the front door before Margaret could. The moment I stepped inside, he was already standing there with a sketchbook tucked beneath one arm and paint on one sleeve of his sweater. "You are late," he announced. I blinked in surprise. "I am 3 minutes early." He considered this carefully. Then I was waiting too soon. It was the longest conversation we had ever had before reaching the art room. Somehow that felt important. The mansion felt different too. Not dramatically different. Just small things. The kind most people would miss. A vase of fresh flowers had appeared near the grand staircase. Music drifted quietly from somewhere in the west wing. One of the staff members smiled as Noah passed by. And Noah smiled back. The first time I saw it, I nearly missed it. A real smile. Quick. Unpracticed. Entirely genuine. During our lesson, he worked on a new painting. The same lake. The same dock. The same sunset. But this time there were 3 figures instead of 2. I noticed immediately. He noticed me noticing. Neither of us mentioned it. Children often reveal their hearts through art long before they trust words. Later that afternoon, Margaret invited us into the kitchen for hot chocolate. Noah sat at the large island counter swinging his legs while she prepared mugs topped with whipped cream. Sunlight spilled through enormous windows overlooking the gardens. The room felt warm in a way the mansion rarely did. "You should have seen him 6 months ago," Margaret said quietly while Noah focused on arranging marshmallows into careful patterns. "He hardly spoke at all." Noah pretended not to hear. Margaret smiled softly. "Now he talks about art supplies, colors, and lesson plans." Noah rolled his eyes dramatically. "That is because art supplies are important." I laughed. Margaret laughed. Even Noah fought back a grin. The sound felt strangely rare inside those walls. As though laughter had once lived there and only recently found its way home. When evening arrived, I prepared to leave. Noah walked with me toward the front entrance. Halfway there, he stopped beside one of the tall windows overlooking the driveway. "Do you like it here?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised me. "Yes." He stared outside. "Most people do not stay very long." My chest tightened. "I am not most people." He nodded slowly. Not because he fully believed me. Because he wanted to. As I stepped onto the front porch, I glanced back through the glass doors. Noah remained standing in the foyer watching me leave. But he was not alone. At the far end of the hallway stood Ethan. Quiet. Observing. His attention was fixed entirely on his son. And for the first time since I had met him, there was something unmistakably different in his expression. Hope. Small. Fragile. Careful. But there. The strange thing about hope is that once it appears, even in the smallest amount, people begin protecting it without realizing they are doing so. And as I drove away beneath the glow of the estate lights, I had the feeling that something inside the mansion had started waking up after a very long sleep. The strongest walls are often built around the softest wounds. 2 weeks passed, and for the first time since I had started working at the estate, the mansion felt less like a monument and more like a home. It happened gradually. The way seasons change. Too slowly to notice at first. Then suddenly everything looks different. Noah talked more. He laughed more. He even started leaving his sketchbooks open instead of hiding them whenever someone walked into the room. One afternoon he proudly showed me an entire collection of drawings he had been keeping in a cabinet beside the art room. There were dozens of them. Landscapes. Lakes. Gardens. Sunsets. Families. Most of the older drawings carried the same quiet sadness I had noticed on my first day. But the newer ones felt brighter somehow. More hopeful. More alive. "You should frame some of these," I told him. Noah looked horrified. "Why?" "Because they are good." He frowned. "They are just drawings." "Noah," I said, laughing softly, "that is exactly what artists say before someone hangs their work in a gallery." He tried very hard not to smile. Failed completely. Later that evening Margaret informed me that Ethan had requested I stay for dinner again. By then the invitations had become almost routine. What surprised me was how much I looked forward to them. Not because of the luxury. The food was excellent, but that was not the reason. It was because those dinners had slowly become the one time all 3 of us occupied the same space without distractions. Without schedules. Without distance. The dining room no longer felt quite so enormous. Noah talked about a painting he wanted to finish. I talked about a student from the community center who had recently won an art competition. Even Ethan contributed occasionally, asking questions that revealed he listened far more carefully than people probably realized. At one point Noah excused himself to retrieve a sketchbook from upstairs. The moment he disappeared, a comfortable silence settled across the table. Ethan glanced toward the staircase. He seems happier. The words were simple. But there was relief behind them. Real relief. He is opening up. Ethan nodded slowly. His fingers rested against the edge of a coffee cup. I was beginning to wonder if he ever would. The honesty surprised me. People often assumed powerful men never admitted uncertainty. Yet I was beginning to discover that Ethan's strength came from somewhere quieter. Somewhere deeper. Children do not stop needing connection, I said softly. Even when they act like they do. His gaze lifted toward me. And adults? I smiled. Adults are usually worse at admitting it. A brief laugh escaped him. Then his expression softened. Not the guarded expression he showed the world. Something gentler. Something real. For a moment neither of us looked away. Then footsteps echoed from the hallway and the moment disappeared. Noah returned carrying his sketchbook. I want to show you something, he announced. He placed the book directly in front of us and opened to a fresh page. My breath caught. The drawing showed 3 people sitting together around a table. The details were simple but unmistakable. One figure had dark hair. One wore a dress. One was smaller than the others. Above them, light poured from a chandelier. Noah looked nervously between us. What do you think? Ethan stared at the drawing for several seconds without speaking. Then he reached out and carefully rested a hand on Noah's shoulder. I think, he said quietly, it might be my favorite one yet. And for the first time since I had entered that mansion, I realized we were no longer strangers sharing a room. Somehow, without any of us noticing exactly when it happened, we had started becoming something else. Some doors stay closed for so long that people eventually forget to ask what is behind them. It started with a rainy afternoon and a wrong turn. Noah had gone to meet Margaret in the kitchen while I searched for a missing sketchbook he insisted he had left upstairs. The mansion was enormous, and despite the weeks I had spent there were still entire sections I had never explored. I climbed a staircase I did not recognize and followed a quiet hallway lined with tall windows. Rain traced silver lines across the glass. The farther I walked, the quieter the house became. No voices. No footsteps. Only the distant sound of rain and the soft creak of old wood beneath my shoes. Then I saw the door. Unlike every other room in the mansion, this one stood apart. Dark wood. Brass handle. No decorations. No photographs nearby. Nothing. It looked ordinary, yet something about it immediately drew my attention. I do not know why. Maybe because every other part of the estate felt lived in now. This door felt forgotten. I reached for the handle. Locked. I should have walked away. Instead, I found myself staring at it for several seconds. That was when a voice behind me broke the silence. Most people do not come up here. I turned so quickly my heart nearly jumped into my throat. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway. He was not angry. If anything, he looked tired. More tired than I had ever seen him. His gaze moved briefly to the locked door before returning to me. I was looking for Noah's sketchbook, I explained. Ethan nodded once. You are not the first person to get lost. Normally he would have smiled after a comment like that. This time he did not. The air felt different. Heavy. I glanced back toward the door. What is in there? The question escaped before I could stop it. For a moment Ethan said nothing. Rain tapped softly against the windows. His eyes remained fixed on the door. A room nobody uses anymore. The answer sounded practiced. Like something repeated many times. Yet there was sadness beneath it. Deep sadness. I nodded, understanding I should not push further. Together we walked back toward the main staircase. But halfway down the hall, I looked back once more. Ethan had stopped walking. He was standing beside the door. Looking at it. Not touching it. Not opening it. Just looking. The expression on his face made my chest tighten. It was the look of someone standing near a memory they could not leave behind. Later that evening, after dinner, Noah sat beside me in the art room sketching quietly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." He hesitated. "Do you think people can miss someone forever?" The pencil stopped moving in my hand. Children always know more than adults realize. "I think people learn how to carry missing someone," I answered softly. Noah stared at his drawing. "Dad still does." My heart sank. Before I could respond, he turned the sketchbook toward me. The page showed a woman standing beneath a tree. Gentle eyes. Long hair. A warm smile. Unlike his other drawings, every detail had been drawn with extraordinary care. "Who is she?" I whispered. Noah looked down at the page. His voice was barely audible. "My mom." Some memories live so quietly inside a house that you do not notice them until someone finally speaks their name. After Noah showed me the drawing of his mother, neither of us said much for a while. The art room felt different. Softer somehow. The rain had stopped outside, and evening sunlight spilled through the tall windows in long bands of gold. Noah continued shading the edges of the portrait with careful strokes. Every line carried affection. Every detail carried remembrance. "She liked to paint too," he said suddenly. I looked up. "Really?" He nodded. "Dad says she could make anything look beautiful." The answer stayed with me long after I left that evening. Over the following week, I began noticing traces of her throughout the mansion. Not obvious traces. Small ones. A vase of fresh white lilies that appeared every Monday in the front hall. A framed landscape painting near the library that looked different from the expensive artwork surrounding it. A piano in the music room with sheet music still neatly arranged as though someone expected to return and continue playing. It felt less like a house preserving memories and more like a house waiting for them. One afternoon, Margaret found me studying the landscape painting. The colors were warm and bright. A lakeside dock beneath a sunset. It reminded me of Noah's drawings. "She painted that herself," Margaret said quietly. I turned toward her. "Noah's mother?" Margaret nodded. Her smile carried both fondness and sadness. "Emily had a way of making people feel welcome. This house used to be very different." Used to be. The words echoed in my mind. Before I could ask more, the sound of a car arriving outside drew Margaret's attention toward the window. Her expression changed instantly. Not fear. Not exactly. Concern. I followed her gaze. A dark luxury sedan had pulled into the circular driveway. Moments later, a man stepped out. He appeared to be in his early 60s. Silver hair. Impeccable suit. Confident posture. There was something about him that immediately felt out of place. "Who is that?" I asked. Margaret's eyes remained fixed on the driveway. "Victor Moretti." The name meant nothing to me. Yet something in her tone made me pay attention. Ethan's uncle. A few minutes later I saw him for myself. Victor entered the mansion with the ease of someone who considered himself part owner of every room. Staff members greeted him politely. He barely acknowledged them. When he spotted me near the library entrance, his eyes narrowed slightly. Not unfriendly. Assessing. Calculating. "You must be Miss Carter," he said. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "I have heard quite a lot about you." I forced a polite smile. "It is nice to meet you." "Is it?" His gaze drifted toward the staircase where Noah's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. Interesting how quickly things change around here. Before I could respond, Ethan appeared at the far end of the hallway. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Victor's smile remained. Ethan's expression did not. They exchanged greetings that sounded perfectly polite to anyone listening. Yet something beneath the surface felt tense. Old. unresolved. As Victor walked away, I noticed Ethan watching him with an expression I had never seen before. And in that moment, standing inside the mansion that was finally beginning to feel alive again, I realized there were still secrets hidden beneath its shining lights. Secrets that had nothing to do with locked rooms and everything to do with the people living inside them. The people who hide the most are often the ones standing in plain sight. After Victor Moretti's visit, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed in ways that were difficult to explain. Nothing obvious happened. No arguments. No dramatic confrontations. Yet I could feel it. Staff members became quieter whenever Victor's name was mentioned. Margaret seemed distracted. Even Ethan appeared more guarded than usual. The only person who seemed untouched by the shift was Noah. At least at first. A few days later, I arrived for our lesson carrying a new set of watercolor paints I had saved up to buy for him. Normally Noah would have been waiting near the front entrance. This time he was nowhere to be found. Margaret greeted me with a strained smile. "He was here a few minutes ago." My stomach tightened immediately. "What do you mean was?" She looked toward the grand staircase. "He wanted to show someone his newest drawing. We searched the art room first. Then the library. Then the music room." Each empty room made the mansion feel larger. Colder. The minutes stretched uncomfortably. Eventually I found Ethan crossing the foyer. One look at my face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. "Nobody can find Noah." For the briefest moment all expression vanished from his face. Then he moved. Calm. Focused. Controlled. Yet I noticed how quickly he headed toward the east wing. As though instinct already knew where to look. Margaret checked the gardens. Staff members searched the lower floor. I found myself climbing the staircase toward the quieter sections of the mansion. The same hallways where I had once discovered the locked room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Dust floated lazily in the air. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Familiar. "Noah." I followed the sound down the hallway. At the very end stood the locked door. Except it was no longer closed. It stood slightly open. My heart skipped. I stepped closer. Inside, sunlight illuminated a room untouched by time. Shelves lined the walls. Paintbrushes rested neatly on a work table. Finished canvases stood beside unfinished ones. White lilies filled a vase near the window. The entire room felt frozen inside a memory. And there, seated cross-legged on the floor, was Noah. Relief washed through me so quickly I nearly laughed. He looked up. I knew somebody would find me. "Noah." I exhaled deeply. "You scared everyone." He glanced around the room. "Sorry." Then his eyes drifted toward one of the paintings hanging nearby. A woman stood beside a lake beneath a sunset sky. The same woman from his drawings. "Emily." "Dad does not come in here very often," Noah said quietly. "But I like it." I looked around the room again. Suddenly everything made sense. The locked door. Ethan's expression in the hallway. The preserved paintings. This was not an abandoned room. It was a heartache preserved in sunlight and canvas. Footsteps sounded behind us. Ethan appeared in the doorway. His eyes found Noah first. Relief flickered across his face before he noticed where we were standing. Then he froze. For several seconds nobody spoke. Noah slowly stood and held up the sketchbook he had been carrying. "I wanted to show Mom my new drawing." Silence settled across the room. Heavy. Gentle. Human. And as Ethan looked around the studio his wife had once filled with color, I realized this room was not hiding a secret. It was protecting a grief that had never truly healed. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It comes in small pieces, like light slipping through a curtain that has been closed for too long. After that afternoon in Emily's studio, something changed inside the mansion. The door remained open. Nobody announced the decision. Nobody discussed it. Yet each time I returned, sunlight flowed into the room once more. Noah spent hours there sketching beside his mother's unfinished canvases. Sometimes Ethan joined him. Not always. But often enough that I noticed. One evening I arrived to find father and son sitting together at the large work table. Noah was painting a lakeside sunset while Ethan quietly sorted old brushes into glass jars. The sight stopped me in the doorway. Neither seemed aware of how extraordinary the moment was. They simply looked comfortable. Like two people finally learning how to share the same silence. A week later, Margaret asked if I could stay after dinner. Her tone carried unusual seriousness. We met in the library while Noah worked upstairs. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar wood. Margaret held a worn photograph in her hands. "There is something you should know," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. She placed the photograph on the table between us. It showed Ethan and Emily standing together beside the lake that appeared in so many paintings. They looked impossibly happy. Young. Hopeful. Alive. Emily believed this family could heal anything, Margaret said. Even old wounds. I studied the photograph. What happened? For a long moment Margaret stared at the image. After she was gone, Ethan stopped letting people close to him. He buried himself in work. Responsibilities. Control. It was easier than grieving. I thought of the locked studio. The preserved flowers. The years of silence. And Noah? Margaret's expression softened. Noah lost both parents in different ways. The words settled heavily in the room. Before I could respond, another voice spoke from the doorway. She is right. I turned. Ethan stood there. He looked calm. But there was no distance in his eyes tonight. No mask. No careful walls. He entered the library slowly and sat across from me. The rain continued outside. Soft. Steady. Honest. I spent years convincing myself I was protecting him, Ethan said. The truth is I did not know how to move forward. Nobody spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt necessary. Ethan glanced toward the photograph. A faint smile touched his face. Emily used to tell me that grief and love come from the same place. His eyes lifted toward me. I never understood what she meant. I remembered Noah's paintings. The open studio. The laughter slowly returning to the mansion. And now? I asked softly. Ethan looked toward the staircase where Noah's voice echoed faintly from upstairs. For the first time since I had met him, his answer came without hesitation. Now I think she meant that the people we love never really leave. We just have to keep making room for them. At that exact moment, Noah came running into the library carrying a fresh canvas. He stopped when he saw us gathered around the photograph. Then he smiled. Not the cautious smile of the boy I met beneath the chandelier. A real one. Bright and effortless. And as he placed the canvas beside his mother's photograph, I realized the greatest secret hidden inside the mansion had never been about the past. It was about whether the people living there would allow themselves to have a future. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought against other people. They are fought against the version of yourself that learned to survive by staying distant. The weeks that followed felt strangely peaceful. Autumn settled over the estate. Leaves painted the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Noah's paintings grew brighter. The studio remained open. And for the first time in years, laughter seemed to belong inside the mansion again. Yet beneath the calm, I sensed Ethan wrestling with something invisible. Not sadness. Not exactly. Change. Real change has a way of unsettling people because it asks them to become someone new. One Saturday afternoon, the estate hosted a small charity event supporting children's art programs across New York. It was the kind of gathering Ethan normally attended out of obligation. This time felt different. Families filled the gardens. Local students displayed paintings beneath white tents. Music drifted through the cool air. Noah spent most of the afternoon proudly showing visitors the artwork created by children from my community center. Watching him speak so confidently felt almost unreal. Then Victor arrived. The atmosphere shifted immediately. His smile remained polished. His suit remained perfect. Yet the warmth of the afternoon seemed to dim around him. Throughout the event, I noticed him observing everything. Noah. Ethan. Me. Measuring. Calculating. Eventually he approached Ethan near the edge of the garden. They spoke quietly, but the tension between them was impossible to miss. I was too far away to hear the words. I only saw Ethan's expression gradually harden. Later, after most guests had left, I found Ethan standing alone near the lake behind the estate. The sunset reflected across the water exactly like the paintings Noah loved to create. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Ethan surprised me. Victor believes I have become distracted. I looked at him carefully. From what? A faint smile appeared. Work. Expectations. The image people have of me. The breeze stirred fallen leaves around our feet. And what do you think? I asked. Ethan stared across the water. For years I convinced myself that success required sacrifice. His voice remained calm. Thoughtful. Honest. Time. Relationships. Family. I kept telling myself I would make room for those things later. His gaze shifted toward the mansion where warm lights glowed through distant windows. Then one day I looked around and realized later had already arrived. The words settled between us. I understood then that this was not about Victor. Not really. It was about choices. The kind people spend years avoiding. Behind us, laughter echoed from the terrace. Noah's laughter. Bright. Unrestrained. Ethan listened to it for a moment before speaking again. I missed too much. I shook my head gently. You are here now. For a long time he said nothing. Then he smiled. Not the careful smile he showed business partners. Not the polite smile he offered strangers. A real one. That is because someone reminded me what matters. My heart skipped unexpectedly. Before I could respond, Noah came running toward us carrying a fresh canvas under one arm. Breathless. Excited. Happy. He stopped between us and proudly held up the painting. It showed 3 figures standing beside a lake beneath a sunset sky. Not separated by distance anymore. Standing together. And as Ethan looked at the painting, I realized he was finally doing something he had not allowed himself to do for years. He was choosing the life waiting in front of him instead of the sorrow behind him. The hardest choice is rarely between right and wrong. It is between what feels safe and what feels true. Winter arrived quietly. The gardens beyond the mansion windows stood covered in a thin layer of frost. White lights wrapped around trees near the driveway. The estate looked beautiful. Peaceful. Yet my heart felt anything but peaceful. For months, Moretti Estate had become part of my life. Noah's laughter. Margaret's kindness. Even the familiar sound of Ethan's footsteps in distant hallways. Without realizing it, I had stopped thinking of the mansion as a workplace. It had become something far more dangerous. It had started feeling like home. That realization frightened me more than I wanted to admit. One evening, after another art lesson, I found myself sitting alone in Emily's studio. Snow drifted softly outside the windows. The room glowed beneath warm lamplight. Around me stood paintings filled with lakes, sunsets, and moments of happiness carefully preserved on canvas. Emily had understood something important. Life changes. People leave. Time moves forward whether we are ready or not. Yet somehow love remains. The thought followed me for days. Eventually I made a decision. A painful one. The following week, I asked Ethan if we could talk. He found me standing beside the lake behind the mansion. The same lake that appeared in so many of Noah's paintings. The water reflected a pale winter sky. Everything felt still. Ethan studied my face for only a second before understanding something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked quietly. I looked away. Suddenly the words felt impossible. "I think it is time for me to leave." Silence followed. The kind that steals the warmth from the air. Ethan did not speak immediately. Neither did I. Finally he looked out across the water. "Why?" The question carried no anger. Only honesty. "Because this was supposed to be temporary." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. "Noah is doing better. He is happy. He does not need me the way he used to." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "And what about what you need?" I had no answer. Because the truth was complicated. The truth was that leaving felt wrong. But staying felt terrifying. Ethan took a slow breath. For years I made decisions based on fear. His eyes met mine. Fear of loss. Fear of failure. Fear of opening doors that might hurt when they closed again. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the lake between us. I am done living that way. My heart pounded. The world seemed unusually quiet. Then Ethan stepped closer. Not dramatically. Not urgently. Just honestly. "Olivia, this house became brighter the day you walked into it." Emotion caught in my throat. "Ethan." He shook his head gently. "You gave Noah something I could not." His voice softened. "And somehow you gave it back to me too." For a long moment neither of us moved. Then distant laughter echoed from the mansion. Noah's laughter. Familiar. Warm. Alive. Together we turned toward the lights glowing through the windows. Toward the life waiting inside. And for the first time, I realized the real choice was not whether I should leave. The real choice was whether I was brave enough to stay. The brightest lights are not the ones hanging from ceilings. They are the ones people carry inside themselves after learning how to love again. 1 year later, snow covered the estate in a blanket of white. The gardens shimmered beneath strings of warm lights. Music drifted softly through the mansion. Laughter echoed from room to room. Standing near the front windows, I barely recognized the place that had once felt so silent. It was still beautiful. Still grand. But now it felt alive. The art studio remained open every day. Noah's paintings covered entire walls. Some had even been displayed in local exhibitions. He was taller now. More confident. More curious about the world. Most importantly, he no longer looked like a child standing outside the light. He had stepped into it. I heard footsteps racing down the staircase behind me. A familiar voice followed. "Olivia, you have to come see this." I turned just in time to see Noah appear carrying a canvas nearly as wide as his shoulders. His excitement made me laugh. Some things never changed. "Slow down," I said. "You are going to trip over your own feet." "Not today." His grin widened. "Today is important." Together we carried the painting into the main hall where guests gathered beneath the enormous chandelier. The same chandelier that had watched over our first meeting. Margaret stood nearby smiling proudly. Several staff members applauded as Noah positioned the canvas on an easel. Then he stepped back. The room grew quiet. The painting showed a lakeside sunset. Golden light reflected across calm water. 3 figures stood together on a dock. One tall. One small. One standing between them. Behind them rose a familiar house glowing with warm light. It was beautiful. Not because of the technique. Not because of the colors. Because of the feeling inside it. Home. I felt emotion catch unexpectedly in my throat. Around the room, people admired the painting. But my attention drifted toward Ethan. He stood near the edge of the crowd watching Noah. The pride in his expression was impossible to miss. The distance that once lived in his eyes was gone. In its place stood something stronger. Peace. When the guests moved away, Ethan crossed the room and stopped beside me. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply looked at the painting together. Then Noah ran off to answer questions from excited visitors, leaving us alone beneath the glow of the chandelier. Ethan smiled. Do you remember the first night you came here? I laughed softly. I was terrified. I know. His eyes held mine. Warm. Steady. Honest. I was too. The answer surprised me enough to laugh again. Ethan glanced around the hall. At the lights. At the guests. At the family gathered inside the home that once felt empty. Then he looked back at me. I spent years building this house. His voice softened. You helped us build a life inside it. Emotion filled the silence between us. Beyond the windows, snow continued falling. Inside, warmth surrounded every room. And as Noah's laughter echoed through the mansion once more, I realized some stories do not end with grand speeches or dramatic moments. Sometimes they end with a simple truth. Love does not erase the past. It teaches people how to carry it forward. And somewhere between loss and healing, between memory and hope, we became the family we had been searching for all along.